They called it charity when they sent Eliza Moore away, the childless widow, the barren wife, the woman whose womb had become the town's favorite whisper. She stood on the platform with a single trunk and understood the truth. This wasn't rescue. This was erasure. Sent to a stranger's remote ranch under the pretense of help, Eliza knew what exile looked like when it wore a polite smile. What she didn't know was that the broken cowboy waiting at the end of that journey would become her greatest ally, or that together they would defy every cruel assumption their world had made about worthiness, motherhood, and what it meant to choose love when the world had chosen to throw you away. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Eliza's story travels. And if her journey moves you, hit that like button. Now, let me tell you how a woman everyone discarded became someone no one could ignore. The train lurched forward, and Eliza Moore pressed her gloved hand against the cold window, watching her old life shrink into nothing. The platform disappeared first, then the church steeple, then the row of shops where she'd once bought fabric for curtains she'd never hang in a home that would never truly be hers. The November wind rattled the glass, and somewhere behind her, a child laughed. The sound sharp as a blade against her ribs. She didn't turn around. The woman across from her, plump and perfumed, had been stealing glances since they'd left the station. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy. "Traveling alone, dear?" Eliza met her eyes briefly. "Yes." "How unusual. A woman of your age, surely you have family." The question hung there, barbed and knowing. Eliza recognized the type, the kind who asked not from concern, but from hunger for gossip to carry home like a prize. "I'm going to my husband," Eliza said quietly. The woman's eyebrows lifted. "Oh, how wonderful. Reuniting after a long separation?" "Something like that." It wasn't exactly a lie. Caleb Dawson was, on paper, her husband now. The marriage had been arranged through letters, facilitated by Reverend Hutchins and the town council with the kind of efficient coldness usually reserved for livestock sales. A practical solution, they'd called it. An opportunity for both parties. Eliza knew better. She'd heard the women whispering outside the general store 3 weeks ago. Martha Calloway's voice had carried clear through the afternoon air. Well, what else can they do with her? Thomas is gone, God rest him, and she never gave him children. A barren woman with no family and no prospects. She's become a burden on Christian charity. I heard Hutchins found someone to take her, some rancher out past Devil's Creek. A widower himself, apparently. Lost his wife and child years back. How fitting. 2 failures hidden away where decent folk won't have to look at them. The laughter that followed had been worse than the words. Eliza had gone home that evening, packed her belongings in silence, and attended the farewell gathering the church ladies had organized with the same frozen dignity she'd perfected over 4 years of marriage to Thomas Moore, a man who'd loved her in his way, but whose mother had made sure Eliza understood her deficiency every single day. A wife's purpose is children, Mrs. Moore had said countless times. A woman who cannot provide that is incomplete. When Thomas died of pneumonia 2 winters ago, Eliza had grieved alone. The town's sympathy had lasted precisely as long as it took to realize his widow had no inheritance worth mentioning and no children to justify her continued existence in their carefully ordered world. Now she was being shipped away like damaged goods, repackaged as charity. The train carried her west for 2 full days. She slept in brief, uncomfortable intervals, ate the dry sandwiches she'd packed, and watched the landscape transform from civilized farmland to endless rolling prairie. The towns grew smaller, the stations more crude. By the second afternoon, they had left behind anything resembling the settled East. This was frontier, raw, unforgiving, and honest in its harshness. When the conductor called out Devil's Creek, only Eliza stood. She collected her trunk, descended to a platform that was little more than weathered boards, and found herself alone as the train pulled away with a mournful whistle. The town, if it could be called that, consisted of perhaps a dozen buildings huddled against the prairie wind. A general store, a saloon, a livery stable, and several structures whose purposes weren't immediately clear. The main street was rutted mud, frozen now in the late November cold. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already white with snow. It was the loneliest place Eliza had ever seen. "Mrs. Dawson?" She turned to find a man standing beside a weathered wagon. He was tall, built like someone who'd spent decades doing hard labor, with shoulders broad enough to carry impossible weight. His face was lined and stern, shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He couldn't have been more than 40, but something in his eyes looked ancient. "Mr. Dawson," she said, keeping her voice steady. He nodded once, sharp and businesslike. "That your only trunk?" "Yes." He lifted it as though it weighed nothing, deposited it in the wagon bed, then gestured toward the seat. "It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch. We should go before the light fails." No greeting, no welcome, no pretense that this was anything other than what it was. A transaction, coldly executed. Eliza climbed up without assistance, arranged her skirts, and folded her hands in her lap. Caleb settled beside her, took up the reins, and urged the horses forward without another word. They rode in complete silence. Eliza studied the landscape because it was easier than studying the stranger beside her. The prairie stretched endlessly, broken only by occasional stands of cottonwood along frozen creek beds. The sky was vast and gray, pressing down like a judgment. The cold bit through her wool coat, and she wondered if it ever got warm here, or if this was simply the temperature of exile. After an hour, Caleb finally spoke. "Reverend Hutchins sent a letter, said you were a widow, said you needed placement." The word made her sound like furniture. "That's accurate," Eliza said. "Said you were hard-working, capable. That true?" "I don't know any other way to be." He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "Good. Ranch doesn't run itself." Another silence, longer this time. Then, "I should be clear about something, Mrs. Dawson. This arrangement, it's practical. Nothing more. You needed a place. I needed help keeping the ranch from falling apart. That's the extent of it." "I understand." "Do you?" He pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her fully. His eyes were dark brown, hard as the frozen ground. "I'm not looking for a wife, not in any real sense. What I lost, that's buried. It stays buried. This is about survival. A roof over your head, food, safety. In exchange, you work, you keep the house, you help where needed, but don't expect anything else." The bluntness should have stung. Instead, Eliza felt something like relief. At least he was honest. At least he wasn't pretending this was something it wasn't. "Mr. Dawson," she said quietly, "I was married for 4 years to a good man I tried very hard to love. I spent every day of those years being reminded that I was insufficient. I am here because the town I lived in decided I was a burden they no longer wished to carry. I have no illusions about romance. What I want is exactly what you're offering, a place to exist without apology. I'll work harder than you expect, and I won't ask for more than you're willing to give." Something shifted in his face, not warmth exactly, but perhaps a fraction less stone. "Fair enough," he said, and set the horses moving again. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon, a collection of weathered buildings in a shallow valley, sheltered on one side by a ridge of pine-covered hills. The main house was larger than Eliza had expected, 2 stories, but clearly neglected. The barn sagged slightly to one side. Fences needed mending. Even from a distance, she could see the weight of abandonment pressing down on everything. Caleb helped her down, retrieved her trunk, and led her inside. The house was cold, not just from lack of fire, but from the absence of life. The front room held furniture covered in dust, a stone fireplace full of old ash, windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in years. The kitchen beyond showed signs of use, a battered table, a cast-iron stove, shelves stocked with basic supplies. But no care. This was a place where someone ate to survive, nothing more. "Upstairs," Caleb said, already climbing. 3 bedrooms. You can take the one on the right. I use the one on the left. Middle rooms, not used." Eliza followed him up the narrow stairs, noting the family photographs that still hung on the walls. A younger Caleb, a beautiful dark-haired woman, a small boy with his father's serious eyes. None of the frames had been dusted. Caleb walked past them as though they didn't exist. He set her trunk down in a small, spare bedroom. "There's linens in the chest, wash basins downstairs, privies out back. I'll get a fire going in the stove, make something to eat. Come down when you're settled." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the stairs. Eliza stood in the gathering darkness, looking around her new prison. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? A prettier cage than the one she'd left, perhaps, but still a place she'd been sent to disappear. She unpacked methodically, hanging her few dresses in the narrow wardrobe, placing her brush and mirror on the dresser, tucking her Bible and Thomas's pocket watch in the top drawer. She'd brought so little, her entire life fit in a single trunk. When she came downstairs, Caleb had coffee brewing and beans heating in a pan. He didn't look at her, just gestured toward the table. They ate in silence. The beans were overcooked, the coffee bitter, but Eliza consumed both without comment. When they finished, she stood and began collecting the dishes. "I'll wash these," she said. "Water's in the bucket by the door. Needs heating first." She found the bucket, located a pot, set water to warm on the stove. While she waited, she swept the kitchen floor, which looked like it hadn't seen a broom in months. Caleb watched her from the table, his expression somewhere between surprise and suspicion. "You don't have to start tonight," he said. "I prefer to be useful. It's been a long journey. Mr. Dawson, I spent 2 days on a train thinking about what I am now, what I've become. I would rather scrub floors than sit with those thoughts." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Suit yourself." Eliza washed the dishes, dried them, put them away in cupboards that were only half organized. She wiped down the table, the counters, the surfaces that spoke of years of bachelor neglect. By the time she finished, full dark had fallen, and Caleb had lit a lamp. "I'm turning in," he said abruptly. "Sunrise comes early. There's work tomorrow. Fence mending on the north pasture. You'll need warmer clothes than what you've got." "I have work dresses. Not for this weather. There's things that belong to, there's clothes in the middle bedroom. You can look through them tomorrow. Take what fits." He meant his wife's clothes. The woman in the photographs, the ghost who still haunted this house. "Thank you," Eliza said softly. He nodded and headed for the stairs, then paused. "Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her given name. "Yes?" "The town that sent you here. They were wrong. About you being a burden." His voice was rough, uncomfortable with the words. "Just wanted you to know that." Before she could respond, he was gone, climbing the stairs to his solitary room. Eliza stood in the quiet kitchen, something unfamiliar and fragile moving in her chest. She banked the fire in the stove, extinguished the lamp, and made her way upstairs in darkness. Sleep came in fragments. She woke repeatedly to unfamiliar sounds, wind against the house, creaking boards, the distant call of something wild. Each time she remembered where she was. Each time the weight of it settled over her again. By the time gray light filtered through the thin curtains, she'd given up on rest. Downstairs she found Caleb already awake, coffee made, bread and butter set out on the table. He glanced up when she entered. "Morning." "Good morning." They ate quickly. When Caleb rose to leave, Eliza followed him outside. The morning was brutally cold, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. Caleb was already striding toward the barn, and Eliza hurried to keep pace, her breath coming out in white clouds. "You don't need to," he started. "You said there was fence mending. I can help." He looked at her again with that same cautious surprise. "You ever mend a fence?" "No, but I can learn." For the first time, something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched his face. "Come on, then." The work was backbreaking. They spent hours in the frozen north pasture, replacing rotted posts, stringing new wire, securing sections that had collapsed under last winter's snow. Eliza's hands went numb inside her gloves. Her back screamed, but she matched Caleb's pace, learning as she went, never complaining. Around midday, he called a break. They sat on a fallen log, sharing water from a canteen and the cold biscuits Eliza had wrapped that morning. "You're stronger than you look," Caleb said. "I'm stronger than most people think." "Why'd they really send you away?" The question was direct, but not unkind. "Letter said you were a widow needing placement, but there's more to it. There always is." Eliza stared out at the mountains. "I couldn't have children. In my town, that made me worthless. When my husband died, I became a problem they needed to solve. You were the solution." "That's it? They threw you out for that?" "It's enough where I come from. A woman's value is measured by her ability to produce heirs. I failed at the one thing I was supposed to do. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then, my wife, Sarah, she died bringing our son into the world. Lived long enough to hold him once. The boy, Daniel, he lasted 3 days. Fever took him. His voice was flat, deliberately empty. That was 7 years ago. I buried them on the hill behind the house. Haven't talked about them since. Eliza looked at him, seeing the rigid control in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the canteen too tight. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be. It's done. I'm telling you so you understand. This house, this ranch, it's built on graves. I'm not looking to build anything new on top of them. This arrangement, it's about keeping things running, nothing more. You understand that? Yes. Good. They returned to work. By the time the light began to fail, they'd completed an entire section of fence. Caleb inspected their work with something approaching approval. You did well, he said. Thank you. Walking back to the house through the gathering dusk, Eliza felt the first snowflakes begin to fall. They were tiny, tentative, but she knew what they promised. Winter was coming to this isolated valley, and she would face it with a stranger who'd made it clear she was here on sufferance, not by welcome. But as they entered the house and Caleb moved to light the lamps while Eliza began preparing their evening meal, she felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not happiness. Not hope. Just the simple relief of being somewhere she could work until her body hurt, sleep in exhaustion, and wake to do it again without anyone whispering about her failures. Without measuring her worth against an impossible standard she could never meet. If this was exile, at least it was honest exile. The days blurred together. Eliza rose before dawn, made coffee and breakfast, worked alongside Caleb until dark. They repaired the barn roof, reinforced the chicken coop, chopped and stacked wood for the coming winter. She learned to handle livestock, to read weather in the sky, to move through the ranch's routines with increasing confidence. In the evenings, she cleaned. Room by room, she attacked the neglect that had accumulated over 7 years. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, beat dust from curtains. She organized the kitchen properly, mended torn linens, brought order to chaos. Caleb watched this transformation with guarded eyes. He never thanked her, but she noticed small things. How he started wiping his boots before entering, how he put his dishes in the wash basin instead of leaving them on the table, how he stopped tracking mud through the rooms she'd just cleaned. They spoke little. Their conversations were practical, what work needed doing, where supplies were running low, whether the weather would hold. But the silence between them was no longer hostile. It was simply the quiet of two people who'd learned to exist in the same space without conflict. 3 weeks after her arrival, the first real snow came. Eliza woke to a world transformed. White covered everything, thick and heavy, still falling in dense curtains. When she went downstairs, Caleb was already at the window, his face grim. We're snowed in, he said. Could last days. Happens every year this time. You get used to it. What do we do? Keep the house warm, feed the livestock, wait it out. For 3 days, the snow fell. They were trapped inside except for necessary trips to the barn. The world shrank to the walls of the house, the crackling fire, the small routines of survival. On the second day, Eliza ventured into the middle bedroom. Caleb had told her to take what she needed, but she'd been avoiding it. Now, with nothing else to occupy her, she opened the door and stepped into the frozen grief inside. It was a child's room. A small bed with carved posts. A rocking horse in the corner, covered in dust. Toys arranged on shelves, and along one wall a wardrobe full of women's clothes. Sarah's things. Untouched for 7 years. Eliza stood in the doorway, her throat tight. This wasn't just a room, it was a shrine. A place where Caleb had locked away everything he'd lost and refused to touch again. She shouldn't be here, but she needed warmer clothes, and winter wouldn't wait for her discomfort. Moving carefully, reverently, she opened the wardrobe. Sarah had been slightly taller, but close enough in size. Eliza selected 2 heavy wool dresses, a thick shawl, a coat lined with rabbit fur. She would alter them to fit properly, make them her own. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. On the small dresser beneath a layer of dust lay a leather journal. Eliza knew she shouldn't open it, but her hands moved before her conscience could stop them. The handwriting inside was elegant, educated. The first entry was dated 8 years ago, shortly after Sarah's marriage to Caleb. Today I became Mrs. Caleb Dawson. He is a hard man, I think, but not unkind. This ranch is more isolated than I expected, but I am determined to make it a home. Mother would say I'm foolish to have come so far from civilization, but I see something in Caleb's eyes, a loneliness that matches my own. Perhaps we can build something good here. Eliza flipped through the pages, reading snapshots of a life. Sarah's struggle to adapt to ranch life, her growing love for Caleb, her joy when she discovered she was pregnant, her fears about childbirth, so far from doctors, from help. The last entry made Eliza's vision blur. The pains have started. Caleb is terrified, though he tries to hide it. I told him not to worry. I told him we would be fine, that soon he would hold his son. I pray I'm right. I pray that if anything happens to me, he will find a way to not bury himself with me. He deserves to live, to be happy. Promise me, whoever reads this, if I don't survive, tell him that. Tell him Sarah wanted him to keep living. Eliza closed the journal carefully, her hands shaking. She understood now why Caleb had sealed this room, why he'd locked himself away from anything that might make him feel. He hadn't just lost his family, he'd lost his future. She took the clothes and left quickly, closing the door behind her. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb reading a week-old newspaper, Eliza mending one of the dresses she'd taken, she spoke without planning to. I went into the middle room today, to find warmer clothes like you said. Caleb's hands tightened on the newspaper, but he didn't look up. Find what you needed? Yes. Thank you. She set down her sewing. Caleb, I saw the journal. Now he looked at her, his face hard. You had no right. I know. I'm sorry. But I read what she wrote. What Sarah wanted for you. Don't. His voice was sharp as a blade. Don't do this. She didn't want you to bury yourself with her. She's dead. He stood abruptly. She's dead, and so is my son. And talking about it doesn't change anything. You're here because we both needed an arrangement. That's all this is. Don't try to make it something else. He left the room, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Eliza sat alone by the fire, the dress forgotten in her lap. Outside, the snow continued falling, burying everything in white silence. She'd overstepped. She'd violated the unspoken rules of their arrangement. Tomorrow, there would be more awkwardness, more careful distance. But that night, lying in her cold bed, she thought about Sarah's words, about how even the dead could want something better for those they'd left behind. And she wondered if two people determined to feel nothing might accidentally feel something anyway, not through grand gestures or passionate declarations, but through the slow accumulation of shared labor, shared silence, shared survival in a place so isolated that pretense became impossible. The snow finally stopped on the 4th day. They dug themselves out, tended to livestock that had weathered the storm, and returned to the rhythm of work. Caleb didn't mention the journal again. Neither did Eliza. But something had shifted, so subtle it was almost imperceptible. When they worked side by side now, Caleb occasionally asked her opinion instead of simply issuing instructions. When she cooked, he began commenting on the meals, even offering a gruff compliment when she made a particularly good stew. Small things, tiny cracks in the walls they'd both built. Winter deepened. December arrived with bitter cold and shorter days. Eliza transformed this house room by room, but she left the middle bedroom untouched. That was Caleb's grief to manage, and she wouldn't intrude again. On Christmas Eve, she made a special meal: roasted chicken, root vegetables, fresh bread, dried apple pie. She'd found a small pine tree near the barn and brought it inside, decorating it with paper stars she'd cut and strung. When Caleb came in from evening chores and saw the tree, he stopped dead. "What's this?" "It's Christmas Eve," Eliza said quietly. "I thought, I'm sorry if it's too much." He stared at the tree for a long moment, then, roughly, "Sarah used to do this, every year. I told her it was foolish, wasting time on decorations, but she insisted." "I can take it down." "No." He moved closer, touched one of the paper stars carefully. "No, leave it. It's good." to remember that not everything has to be work. They ate dinner in companionable silence. After, Caleb brought out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving and poured them each a small glass. "To survival," he said, raising his glass. "To second chances," Eliza countered softly. Their glasses clinked together, a small sound in the quiet house. Later, as Eliza banked the fire for the night, Caleb spoke from the doorway. "You've done good work here. The house, it hasn't looked this way in years. Feels almost like a home again." It was the most he'd ever said about what she'd brought to this place. "Thank you," she whispered. "Eliza." He hesitated, struggling with words. "I know I'm not easy to live with. I know this arrangement isn't what any woman would choose. But I want you to know, you're not a burden here. You never have been. You pull your weight, and then some. That town that sent you away, they were damn fools." Before she could respond, he was gone again, retreating to his room. But this time, Eliza smiled in the darkness. The winter pressed on, relentless and harsh. But inside the ranch house in the isolated valley, two people who'd been sent into exile were learning, slowly, carefully, that maybe exile wasn't the end of everything. Maybe sometimes it was just the beginning. January came with winds that cut like knives and temperatures that froze water in the basin before morning. Eliza woke each day to frost patterns on her bedroom window, intricate as lace and just as fragile. She'd grown accustomed to the cold, to the way her breath clouded in the air until she got the kitchen stove burning, to the weight of Sarah's heavy coat around her shoulders. She'd also grown accustomed to Caleb's rhythms, the way he moved through the house like a ghost before dawn, the particular sound of his boots on the porch, the brief moment each morning when he'd pause in the kitchen doorway, as if surprised to find coffee already made and breakfast waiting. They'd settled into something that wasn't quite partnership, but was no longer mere arrangement. The silence between them had textures now, sometimes comfortable, sometimes weighted with things neither knew how to say. Eliza had stopped expecting warmth and found she didn't mind the steady, reliable presence of someone who showed up, did the work, and didn't demand she be anything other than competent. On a bitter morning in mid-January, Caleb came in from feeding the livestock with news that changed everything. "Storm's coming," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "Bad one. I can feel it in the air. We need to bring in extra wood, check all the shutters, make sure the animals are secure." Eliza looked out the window at the deceptively clear sky. "How can you tell?" "You live here long enough, you learn to read what's not obvious. Trust me, this one's going to be worse than what we've seen so far." They spent the day preparing. Caleb chopped wood until they had enough stacked on the porch to last a week. Eliza reinforced the chicken coop, checked food stores, filled every container they had with water. By late afternoon, the first clouds appeared on the horizon, dark and ominous. "Get inside," Caleb said, securing the barn door. "Whatever happens, we don't leave the house until it passes. The barn's close, but in a whiteout you can get lost between here and there. People have frozen to death 10 feet from their own door." The storm hit after dark with a fury that made the December snow seem gentle. Wind screamed around the house, rattling shutters and finding every crack in the walls. Snow came so thick and fast that Eliza couldn't see the barn when she looked out the window, just white chaos, swirling and violent. "How long will it last?" she asked, setting bowls of stew on the table. Caleb shook his head. "Could be a day, could be 3. No way to know." They ate quietly, the storm a constant roar outside. After, Eliza washed dishes while Caleb sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle. Not because it needed cleaning, she suspected, but because his hands needed occupation. Around midnight, when Eliza was already in bed, she heard something that made her heart stop. A sound. Faint. Almost lost in the wind, but distinct. Knocking. She sat up, straining to hear. There. Again. Definitely knocking, weak and desperate. Eliza threw on her robe and rushed downstairs to find Caleb already at the door, lamp in hand, his face grim. "Someone's out there," he said. "In this storm, Christ." He wrenched the door open against the wind's resistance, and snow blasted into the house. In the lamplight, Eliza saw a figure collapsed on the porch. A woman, snow-covered, barely conscious. "Help me," Caleb commanded. Together they dragged her inside. She was young, maybe 20, her clothes inadequate for the cold, her lips blue, her body shaking violently. Blood stained the snow beneath her. "She's hurt," Eliza said, her hands already moving to check for injuries. "Caleb, she's bleeding. Get blankets. Hot water, quickly." Eliza ran. She stoked the fire high, set water to heat, gathered every blanket in the house. When she returned, Caleb had the woman laid out before the hearth, peeling away her frozen outer layers. In the firelight, Eliza saw the truth. The woman was heavily pregnant, and the blood wasn't from an injury. "She's in labor," Eliza whispered, terror flooding through her. "Caleb, she's having the baby." His face went white. For a moment he looked like a man staring into his own grave. "No, not again. I can't." "You have to." Eliza gripped his shoulders, forced him to meet her eyes. "I don't know what to do. I've never done this. You have. Sarah died. This woman is dying right now if we don't help her. I need you, Caleb, please." Something shifted in his expression, fear transforming into grim determination. He nodded once. All right. We need more light. And the water, when it's hot. Clean cloth. Whiskey." They worked together in desperate synchronization. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, moaning with contractions that were coming too fast, too hard. When she was lucid enough to speak, her words came in broken fragments. "Baby, please, save my baby." "What's your name?" Eliza asked gently, bathing the woman's face with warm water. "Where did you come from?" Anna Winters. I ran. He would have killed me." "Who?" Caleb asked, but Anna's eyes rolled back, another contraction seizing her. The birth was brutal. Anna was too weak, had been out in the cold too long, had lost too much blood. Eliza held her hand, whispered encouragement, while Caleb did what needed to be done with hands that shook but never faltered. Just before dawn, as the storm raged unabated, a baby's cry pierced the air. "A boy," Caleb said, his voice rough. "You have a son, Anna." He wrapped the infant in clean cloth, placed him in Anna's arms. She looked down at her baby with eyes that were already dimming and smiled, a smile of such pure love that Eliza had to turn away. "Beautiful," Anna whispered. "My beautiful boy, please, promise me." "Don't talk," Eliza said. "Save your strength. You need to rest. Promise me you'll keep him safe. Don't let them find him. Don't let him—" Her voice failed. She looked at the baby, then at Eliza, then at Caleb. "Good people. I see it. You're good people. Please." "We promise," Eliza said, tears streaming down her face. "We promise. But you're going to be fine, Anna. You're going to raise him yourself. No." Anna's hand found Eliza's, gripped weakly. "I'm dying, I know, but he lives. That's enough. That's everything. His name, call him Matthew. It means gift from God." Her eyes closed. Her breathing grew shallow, rattling. Caleb moved to try to wake her, to do something, but Eliza caught his hand. "Let her hold him," she whispered. "Let her have this." "Ditas." They sat together in the pre-dawn darkness, watching a young mother hold her baby for the first and last time. As the storm howled outside, Anna Winters took her final breath with her son cradled against her heart. For a long moment, neither Eliza nor Caleb moved. Then the baby began to cry, a thin, demanding wail, and reality crashed back. "What do we do?" Eliza asked. Caleb's face was a mask of old grief and fresh pain. "I'll take care of her. You take care of him." He lifted Anna's body with terrible gentleness, carried her to the middle bedroom, Sarah and Daniel's room, and laid her on the small bed. Eliza followed with the baby, who'd stopped crying and now looked around with unfocused newborn eyes. "We can't bury her until the storm passes," Caleb said. "It's cold enough in here. She'll keep." It was practical, brutal, necessary. Eliza nodded. "The baby," she said. "I don't know how to care for an infant. I've never—" "I know." Caleb's voice was hollow. "But we'll figure it out. We have to." The storm lasted 2 more days. In that time, Eliza and Caleb learned to care for Matthew through trial and error. They fed him sugar water when he cried, wrapped him in soft cloths, kept him warm by the fire. Eliza discovered that if she held him against her chest and walked slowly around the room, he would settle. Caleb fashioned a makeshift cradle from a drawer and blankets. Neither of them spoke about what would happen next. They were too focused on keeping this tiny life from slipping away. On the third day, the storm finally broke. Caleb went out into waist-deep snow and dug a grave on the hill beside Sarah and Daniel. The ground was frozen hard, and it took him hours. Eliza watched from the window, the baby asleep in her arms, and understood what it cost him to do this. They buried Anna Winters at sunset. Caleb said a few simple words about a woman they hadn't known, who died bringing life into the world. Eliza held Matthew close, shielding him from the cold wind, and made a silent promise to the mother beneath the snow. Walking back to the house through the blue twilight, Caleb finally spoke. "We need to decide what to do with him." "What do you mean?" "An infant needs more than we can give. There's an orphanage in Cheyenne. We could take him there when the weather clears." "No." The word came out sharper than Eliza intended. She softened her voice. "No, Caleb. She died asking us to keep him safe. We promised." "Eliza, we're not equipped for this. A baby needs food, warmth, and people who won't abandon him. We can provide that." Caleb stopped walking, turned to face her. In the fading light, his expression was anguished. "You don't understand what you're asking. I buried my son 7 years ago. I won't put myself through that again." "Then don't." Eliza met his eyes steadily. "Don't love him if you can't bear to. Just help me keep him alive. That's all I'm asking." "And what happens when you can't do it alone? When he gets sick or winter comes again then we face it together, like we faced everything else." Matthew stirred against her chest, made a small sound. Without thinking, Eliza rocked him gently, and he settled. Caleb watched this with something breaking across his face. "You want this? You really want to keep him?" "I was told my entire adult life that I was worthless because I couldn't have children. Now a child needs me. Yes, Caleb, I want to keep him. I want to prove that every person who said I was barren and useless was wrong. I want to show them that motherhood isn't just about carrying a baby. It's about choosing to love one even when you're terrified." "What if I can't do it?" His voice cracked. "What if I look at him and all I see is Daniel? What if I fail him the way I failed my son?" Eliza shifted the baby to one arm, reached out with the other to touch Caleb's face. It was the first time she'd touched him with tenderness, and he flinched but didn't pull away. "You didn't fail Daniel. You didn't fail Sarah. Sometimes people die, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. But Matthew is alive. We can choose to give him a chance. We can choose to be his family, even if we're terrified." Caleb closed his eyes, his jaw working. "You're asking me to break open everything I buried. I'm asking you to live again, just like Sarah wanted." He was quiet for so long that Eliza thought she'd lost the argument. Then he opened his eyes, looked down at the baby in her arms, and slowly, carefully, reached out to touch Matthew's small hand. Tiny fingers curled around Caleb's rough, calloused index finger and held on. Something in Caleb's face simply shattered. "God help us," he whispered. "All right, we'll keep him. But Eliza, if this goes wrong, if we can't do this, it won't. We will." She said it with more confidence than she felt, but Matthew needed them to believe it, so she would. They walked back to the house together, no longer 2 people in exile but 3, a man, a woman, and a baby who'd been born into a blizzard and somehow survived. The next weeks were the hardest of Eliza's life. Matthew was colicky, crying for hours despite their efforts to soothe him. Eliza walked him endlessly, sang songs she half remembered from childhood, tried every folk remedy she could think of. Caleb rigged a goat to milk, and they fed Matthew with a rag soaked in diluted goat's milk, praying it would be enough. Neither of them slept more than a few hours at a time. They took shifts, Eliza from midnight to dawn, Caleb from dawn until noon, then they switched again. The house became a place of exhausted routine punctuated by infant screams. On the worst night, when Matthew had been crying for 6 hours straight and nothing worked, Eliza sat on the floor by the fire and simply wept alongside him. She was so tired she could barely think, so overwhelmed she wanted to scream. Then Caleb was there, kneeling beside her, taking the baby from her arms. "Go sleep," he said quietly. "I'll take him. You've been working all day, and you've been walking him all night. Go, Eliza. I've got him." She was too exhausted to argue. She dragged herself upstairs and collapsed into bed, certain she wouldn't be able to sleep with Matthew still crying below. She woke 6 hours later to silence and sunlight. Panic sent her rushing downstairs, terrified that something had happened. But she found Caleb asleep in the rocking chair, Matthew cradled against his chest, both of them breathing peacefully. Eliza stood frozen, watching this man who'd sworn he wouldn't love this child holding him like something precious and irreplaceable. Caleb's hand was spread protectively across Matthew's small back. His face, usually so hard and guarded, was soft in sleep. This was what breaking open looked like. Eliza made coffee quietly, started breakfast, gave them both a few more minutes of peace. When Caleb finally woke, he looked startled to find Matthew still in his arms, then carefully guilty. "I didn't mean to fall asleep." "Thank you," Eliza said simply, "for giving me rest, for taking care of him." Caleb looked down at the baby, his expression complex. He stopped crying when I told him about the ranch, about the horses and the mountains, and how spring comes late here, but when it does, everything turns green. He seemed to like the sound of my voice. He knows you're trying to keep him safe, or he's just too young to know better. But there was no bite in the words, just a kind of wondering tenderness. February brought cold that was somehow worse than January's, deep and penetrating and relentless. But inside the ranch house, something warm was growing. Matthew began to thrive, gaining weight, becoming more alert. He'd focus on their faces now, tracking movement with wide eyes. Eliza caught Caleb talking to him while doing chores, narrating his actions, explaining things to an infant who couldn't possibly understand. "See, we're chopping kindling now. You have to angle the axe just right or the wood won't split clean. When you're bigger, I'll teach you." When Matthew smiled for the first time, a real genuine smile, it was at Caleb. The big man stood there holding the baby, struck absolutely dumb by that toothless grin. "He smiled," Caleb said, his voice thick. "Eliza, he smiled at me." "Of course he did. You're his father." The word hung in the air between them. Caleb looked at her, and for the first time he didn't correct it. "And you're his mother," he said quietly. Eliza's throat tightened. She'd never expected to hear those words, never thought she'd have the right to them. "We should make it legal," Caleb continued. "If we're going to do this, raise him as ours. We need to protect him. People will ask questions. A baby appearing out of nowhere during a storm, it'll raise talk." "What are you suggesting?" "We tell people the truth, mostly. A woman came to our door during the blizzard, had her baby here, and died. We took him in. It happens on the frontier, but if anyone comes looking, if Anna was running from someone like she said, they might try to take him. We need to be his legal parents, and for that," he hesitated, "we should make our marriage real, not just on paper, a real family." Eliza's heart was beating too fast. "Caleb, you don't have to—" "I want to." He said it firmly, looking her straight in the eye. "These past months, you've worked harder than anyone I've known. You've made this house a home again. You've brought life back to a place that was just about dying. And now with Matthew, I look at you with him, and I see what a mother should be. Someone who chooses love even when she's scared. Someone who shows up every day and does the hard work." He shifted Matthew to one arm, reached out with the other to take Eliza's hand. "I'm not good at this. At feelings, at words. Sarah was the one who knew how to say things right. But I know what I see. And what I see is a woman I respect. A woman I trust. A woman I—" He struggled, then continued. "A woman I could love, if you'd let me try." Eliza looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd been a stranger 4 months ago and was now offering her everything she'd thought she'd lost forever. "I'm still barren," she whispered. "Matthew doesn't change that. I can't give you more children. You've given me back my life. That's enough, more than enough. The town will talk. About Matthew, about us. Let them talk. I stopped caring what people think a long time ago." He squeezed her hand gently. "What do you say, Eliza? Will you be my wife, truly?" Will you help me raise this boy? Will you let this broken-down cowboy try to make you happy? She looked at Matthew, sleeping peacefully in Caleb's arms. She looked at Caleb, this hard man with the soft heart he'd tried so desperately to protect. She looked around the house she'd transformed, at the life they'd built from exile and grief. Yes, she said. Yes, Caleb, I will. He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Then he leaned forward, still holding Matthew carefully, and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, the kiss of someone learning how to hope again. When they pulled apart, Matthew was awake, looking between them with solemn eyes, as if bearing witness to the promises they'd made. That night, after Matthew was settled in his cradle, Caleb took Eliza's hand and led her upstairs, not to her room, but to his. Inside, he lit the lamp, and she saw that he'd changed things. Fresh linens on the bed, flowers in a jar by the window, preserved somehow through the winter. Small touches that spoke of preparation, of intention. I want to do this right, he said quietly. If you'll have me. Eliza's answer was to step into his arms, and for the first time they came together not as strangers sharing space, but as husband and wife choosing each other. It was tender and awkward and real. Two people learning how to be vulnerable after years of protective armor. Later, lying in the darkness with her head on Caleb's chest, listening to his heartbeat, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the woman labeled barren and exiled to this, a mother, a wife, a partner in building something new. What are you thinking? Caleb asked, his voice rumbling under her ear. That I'm grateful. For the storm that brought Anna, for Matthew, for you giving us a chance. His arm tightened around her. I'm the one who should be grateful. You've given me back everything I thought I'd lost. A reason to wake up. A reason to believe in tomorrow. They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, while in the next room a baby slept peacefully, unaware that he'd become the bridge between two broken people and helped them build something whole. Winter began to loosen its grip as February turned to March. The days grew marginally longer, the cold marginally less brutal. Matthew continued to thrive, becoming more alert, more responsive, more unmistakably theirs. But on a bright March morning, when the snow was melting and Eliza was hanging wash on the line, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A rider coming up the valley. Not a neighbor. They had none close enough for casual visits. This was someone with purpose, riding hard. Caleb, she called, and he appeared from the barn immediately, reading the tension in her voice. He saw the rider and his expression went hard. Get Matthew. Take him upstairs. Don't come down until I call you. Caleb, who... Now, Eliza. She ran inside, scooped Matthew from his cradle, and hurried upstairs. From the bedroom window, she watched Caleb position himself in the yard, waiting. The rider arrived in a cloud of muddy snow. He was well-dressed, riding a fine horse, someone with money and authority. When he dismounted, his movements were sharp with anger. Eliza couldn't hear the words, but she could see the confrontation unfold. The man gesturing angrily, Caleb standing firm, arms crossed, the argument escalating. Then the stranger said something that made Caleb's posture change, not backing down, but preparing for a fight. Eliza's arms tightened around Matthew. Whoever this man was, whatever he wanted, she would not let him take their son, because Matthew was theirs now. Whatever came next, whatever battles they had to fight, they would fight them together. The storm that had brought them a child was over. But another storm was just beginning. Eliza pressed Matthew closer to her chest, her heart hammering as she watched the confrontation unfold in the muddy yard below. The stranger was tall, impeccably dressed in a wool coat that spoke of wealth, the kind of man who expected obedience and got it. Even from this distance, she could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the aggressive thrust of his chin as he spoke to Caleb. Caleb hadn't moved, but his stance had shifted into something dangerous. Eliza had seen him face down an injured bear once, calm and lethal, and he wore that same expression now, absolutely still on the surface, violence coiled underneath. The stranger's voice rose, loud enough that fragments carried through the closed window. My right. The boy. Anna's child. Eliza's blood turned to ice.
Matthew stirred in her arms, made a small sound, and she rocked him automatically, her eyes never leaving the scene below. Caleb said something too quiet to hear.
The stranger responded by jabbing his finger at Caleb's chest. A mistake. Caleb's hand shot out, gripped the man's wrist, and even from her vantage point, Eliza could see the stranger's face go white with pain. Then Caleb released him, stepped back, and pointed toward the house. The gesture was unmistakable. "Get off my property." The stranger rubbed his wrist, his face twisted with fury, but he was smart enough not to escalate. Instead, he reached into his coat, Eliza's breath caught, and pulled out not a weapon but papers. He thrust them at Caleb, said something sharp and final, then mounted his horse with the stiff dignity of a man retreating but not surrendering. As the rider disappeared down the valley, Caleb stood in the yard holding the papers, his head bowed. He looked like a man who'd just been told his execution date. Eliza heard his boots on the porch, then the door. She waited, Matthew warm and solid against her heart, until Caleb appeared in the bedroom doorway. His face was gray. "Who was that?" she asked, though part of her already knew. Caleb held up the papers. "Marcus Hartwell. He claims to be Matthew's grandfather." The world tilted. Eliza sat down hard on the bed, her arms instinctively tightening around the baby. "That's not possible. Anna never said—" "She didn't have to. He knew she was here, knew she died here. And he knows we have her son." Caleb's voice was hollow. "He's filed a legal claim in Cheyenne. Says the boy belongs to him as next of kin. Says we're holding his grandson illegally. But Anna ran from someone. She was terrified. Hartwell says she was mentally unstable. Says she ran away in a delusional state, and he's been searching for her since December. Says she stole money from him, that she was always troubled, that the pregnancy made her worse." Caleb crumpled the papers in his fist. He's painting himself as the concerned father-in-law, us as opportunists who took advantage of a dying woman. That's a lie, all of it. You saw her, Caleb. She was running for her life. I know, you know, but can we prove it? He sank down beside her on the bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. Anna's dead. Whatever she was running from, whatever Hartwell did or didn't do, she can't testify to any of it. It's his word against ours, and he's a wealthy, respected businessman from Cheyenne. He gestured helplessly. We're nobody. Matthew began to fuss, and Eliza stood, walking him in small circles the way he liked. There has to be something we can do. We can't just give him up, Caleb. We promised Anna. We promised her we'd keep him safe. I know what we promised, Caleb's voice cracked. But Eliza, this man has lawyers. He has money. He has influence. The papers say we have 30 days to appear in court in Cheyenne or forfeit all claim to the child. 30 days to find a way to fight someone who can buy any judge in the territory. Then we find a lawyer of our own. With what money? The ranch barely breaks even. We've got enough to survive, nothing more. Eliza stopped pacing, turned to face him. We sell something, the livestock, land, whatever it takes. And if we lose anyway, then we have nothing, no money, no ranch, no Matthew. We'd lose everything. We lose everything if we don't fight. She knelt in front of him, Matthew balanced on her hip. Listen to me. I spent years being told I was worthless because I couldn't have children. When Matthew came to us, when Anna put him in my arms and asked us to keep him safe, that was the first time in my adult life that I felt like I mattered, like I had a purpose. I won't give that up without a fight. I won't let some stranger take our son just because he has money and we don't. Caleb looked at her, then at Matthew, and something hardened in his expression. You're right, we fight, but we need to be smart about it. Hartwell's not going to make this easy. What did he say to you? Out there? Caleb's jaw tightened. He said Anna was married to his son, Richard. Said Richard died 6 months ago, thrown from a horse, broke his neck. Said Anna went mad with grief and ran away while pregnant, and he's been searching for her ever since. He painted himself as a grieving father who just wants to raise his grandson in comfort and security. And you didn't believe him? Not for a second. Anna was terrified, Eliza. She said, he would have killed me. That's not the fear of someone running from grief. That's the fear of someone running from danger. So we tell the court that. It's our word against his, and he'll have witnesses, servants, business associates, people who'll swear he's a model citizen. What do we have? Eliza thought hard. We have Anna's body. We buried her on the hill. That's proof she died here, proof we didn't invent her. He already knows she died here. He's not disputing that. He's saying we should have immediately reported her death and turned the baby over to authorities so he could be notified as a next of kin. Which we would have done if we'd known there was next of kin to notify. Anna didn't tell us anything except to keep Matthew safe. That's what we'll argue. But Eliza, you need to understand, the law favors blood relatives, especially wealthy ones. We're going to walk into that courtroom at a severe disadvantage. Matthew began to cry, hungry now, and Eliza moved to prepare his feeding. Her hand shook as she warmed the goat's milk, mixed it to the right consistency, soaked the cloth. Caleb watched her, and when she sat down with the baby, he pulled a chair close and simply stayed near. Not hovering, just present. There's something else, he said quietly as Matthew fed. Hartwell said that if we cooperate, if we hand Matthew over willingly, he'll compensate us for our trouble. $500 and no legal action. Eliza's head snapped up. He tried to buy our son. He tried to make this easy. And when I refused, he made it very clear that he can make our lives difficult. He knows people. He has resources. He said that one way or another, he'll have his grandson, and we should think carefully about whether we want to be destroyed in the process. He threatened you. He threatened us, both of us. Caleb reached out, touched Matthew's small hand where it rested against the feeding cloth. I told him to go to hell. That's when he threw the court papers at me. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Matthew's contented suckling. Then Eliza said, "We need to go to Cheyenne. We need to find someone who'll help us. I know a man there, Jack Morrison. We served together during the border conflicts years back. He became a lawyer after the fighting stopped. I haven't seen him in 5 years, but he's honest. If anyone will take our case, it's him." Then we go tomorrow. Caleb shook his head. I go tomorrow. You stay here with Matthew. The journey's too hard for an infant, and I won't risk him. Caleb, please, Eliza, I need to know you're both safe. If Hartwell's watching us, if he tries something while I'm gone, you're better off here where you know the land, where you have the rifle and can defend yourself if needed. She wanted to argue, but he was right. Taking Matthew on a multi-day journey in early March, when the weather could turn without warning, would be dangerous. And someone needed to stay with the ranch. How long will you be gone? A week, maybe more. Depends on whether I can convince Morrison to help us, and what he says about our chances. Caleb stood, paced to the window. I don't like leaving you alone. Not with Hartwell knowing where we are. I've been alone before. I can handle it. Not like this. Not with someone like him circling. He turned back to her. There's a shotgun in the barn. I'll bring it to the house before I leave. And I'll talk to Samuel Pritchard. He's got a place about 10 miles south. I'll ask him to check on you while I'm gone. I don't need checking on. I need to know you're safe, Caleb said fiercely. Both of you. Please, Eliza. Let me do this. She saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear she felt every time she looked at Matthew and imagined losing him. All right. But you come back, Caleb Dawson. You hear me? You don't let Hartwell or his lawyers or anyone else stop you from coming back to us. He crossed to her in 2 strides, bent down, and kissed her with desperate intensity. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. I'll come back. I promise. Caleb left at dawn the next morning. Eliza stood on the porch with Matthew bundled against the cold, watching until horse and rider disappeared into the gray morning. Then she went inside, barred the door, and tried not to think about how empty the house felt. The days crawled past. Eliza kept herself busy with endless tasks: cleaning, cooking, caring for Matthew, tending the livestock. She slept lightly, the shotgun loaded and propped beside her bed, starting at every unfamiliar sound. On the 3rd day, Samuel Pritchard rode up as promised. He was an older man, grizzled and kind, who'd known Caleb for years. Just checking in, Mrs. Dawson, he said from his horse, not dismounting. Caleb asked me to make sure you're managing all right. We're fine, Mr. Pritchard. Thank you for coming. He glanced around the yard, his expression troubled. Heard there was some stranger up here a few days back. Man from Cheyenne. News traveled fast, even in isolated country. Marcus Hartwell. He's claiming our son is his grandson. Pritchard's eyebrows rose. That the baby you took in during the storm? Yes, the mother died here. We've been raising him since. Hartwell trying to take him from you? He's filed legal papers. Caleb's gone to Cheyenne to find a lawyer. Pritchard spat into the mud. Hartwell, I know that name. Rich bastard who made his money in mining and railroads. Ruthless son of a bitch, pardon my language. You're in for a fight if he's decided he wants something. We're not giving up our son without that fight. Good for you. If you need anything, and I mean anything, you send word. I don't have much, but what I got is yours if it helps. He tipped his hat. I'll check back in a few days. After he left, Eliza felt marginally better. At least they weren't completely alone in this. At least one person in the territory was on their side. That night, she sat in the rocking chair with Matthew, watching the fire burn low. Your daddy will come home soon, she whispered to him, and we'll figure this out. We'll find a way to keep you safe. I promise. Matthew looked up at her with solemn eyes, and she wondered what he understood, if anything. He was so small, so helpless, so completely dependent on two people who were trying desperately not to fail him. On the 7th day, Caleb returned. Eliza heard the horse and ran to the door, flinging it open to find him dismounting, exhausted and mud-splattered. She wanted to throw herself into his arms, but held back, reading the grim set of his face. Did you find Morrison? She asked. I found him. Caleb tied off the horse, climbed the porch steps. Inside, he shed his coat, warmed his hands by the fire, and finally looked at her properly. He'll take the case. But Eliza, the news isn't good. Her stomach nodded. Tell me. Morrison did some digging. Marcus Hartwell is exactly as powerful as he claimed. He owns half of Cheyenne, mining operations, railroad investments, real estate. He has connections to the territorial governor. He's donated heavily to churches and schools. On paper, he's a pillar of the community. And Anna? Morrison couldn't find much. Marriage records confirm she was married to Richard Hartwell, Marcus's son. Richard died in a riding accident last August, just like Marcus said. Anna disappeared in November. No one reported her missing, at least not publicly, but Morrison found a private detective who'd been hired to find a disturbed young woman who'd run away from her family. So Hartwell was looking for her. Looking hard. And he found her. Found us. Caleb sat down heavily at the table. Morrison says our case is weak. We have no evidence that Anna was fleeing abuse. We have no witnesses to anything she said that night. Hartwell will argue that she was mentally unstable, that we should have immediately contacted authorities, and that as the child's grandfather, he has legal right to custody. What about what we want? We've been raising Matthew. Doesn't that count for something? Not as much as blood, especially blood with money and influence. Caleb rubbed his face. Morrison says our best chance is to argue that Anna made a deathbed request, and we honored it in good faith, that we're providing a stable, loving home, that removing Matthew from the only parents he's known would be harmful to him. Will that work? Morrison doesn't know. The judge is Samuel Bennett. He's supposed to be fair, but he's also aware of who pays for what in Cheyenne. Hartwell's money funds a lot of civic improvements. Going against him would take either ironclad evidence or serious courage. Eliza felt despair rising, but pushed it down. When is the hearing? 3 weeks. We have to be in Cheyenne on April 4th. Morrison will prepare our case, but he warned me. We need to be ready for anything. Hartwell won't fight clean. He'll dig into our lives, find anything he can use against us. What could he possibly use? We're nobody. We have nothing to hide. Caleb's expression grew pained. Our marriage. It was arranged, Eliza. People know that. Hartwell could argue that we're not a real family, that we took Matthew for convenience or financial gain. Financial gain? We're barely scraping by. He offered us money, remember? He could twist that, say we refused because we thought we could get more by keeping the child, make us look like opportunists. Eliza wanted to scream at the injustice of it. Instead, she went to the cradle where Matthew slept, looked down at his peaceful face. Then we prove we're a real family. We show the court that we love him, that we're good parents, that he's thriving with us. Morrison said the same thing. He wants to meet Matthew.
See how we are with him. He'll use that in court. Witnesses to testify about our character, evidence of Matthew's health and happiness. Caleb joined her by the cradle. But he also said we need to prepare for the possibility that we lose, that Hartwell wins and takes Matthew. No. Eliza's voice was steel. That's not going to happen.
Eliza, I mean it, Caleb. I don't care how much money Hartwell has or how many judges he owns. That man is not taking our son. Anna trusted us. She died asking us to keep Matthew safe. I won't break that promise. Caleb pulled her close, and she felt his heart hammering against her cheek. I won't either. But we have to be smart. If we lose in court, Hartwell could have the law on his side. They could take Matthew by force. Then we don't lose. And if we do anyway? Eliza pulled back, looked him in the eye. Then we run. We take Matthew and we disappear. Canada, Mexico, somewhere Hartwell can't reach us. That would make us fugitives. We'd lose the ranch, our lives here, everything.
I don't care. Matthew is more important than any of that. Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a kind of fierce pride. You really mean that? Every word. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, and she kissed him back with all the fear and determination burning inside her. When they broke apart, Caleb's eyes were bright. All right then. We fight with everything we have, and if we lose, we run. Together. The three of us. Together, Eliza agreed. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Morrison came to the ranch twice, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who asked endless questions and took copious notes. He observed Eliza and Caleb with Matthew, watching how they cared for him, how natural they were together as a family. You're good with him, Morrison said after the second visit. Both of you. That'll help. But I need you to understand, Hartwell's going to paint a very different picture. He'll say the boy deserves wealth, education, opportunities you can't provide. He'll make your love look like poverty and his money look like security. So what do? Caleb asked. We make the court see what I see, a child who's loved, parents who will sacrifice anything for him, a family that's real regardless of how it was formed. Morrison closed his notebook. And we hope Judge Bennett values that more than he values Hartwell's donations. In between Morrison's visits, Eliza and Caleb worked frantically to make the ranch as presentable as possible. They knew Hartwell's lawyers might come to inspect their home, looking for evidence of unsuitability. Every room was scrubbed, every repair made. Eliza sewed new curtains, Caleb mended fences, and painted the barn. They wanted anyone who came to see a place worthy of raising a child. Samuel Pritchard spread word among the neighboring ranches, and support came from unexpected places. Families Eliza had never met sent letters attesting to Caleb's character. The shopkeeper in Devil's Creek wrote praising Eliza's kindness and work ethic. Even the local minister, who'd presided over Sarah's funeral years ago, offered to testify that Caleb was a good man who'd suffered terrible loss and deserved a second chance at family. People care about you, Eliza said one evening, reading through the letters. More than you realized. Caleb looked uncomfortable. I never asked for this. You didn't have to. They see what I see, a man worth fighting for. 2 days before they were scheduled to leave for Cheyenne, Marcus Hartwell appeared again. This time he brought a woman with him, severe, dressed in black, with a face like carved granite. She introduced herself as Mrs. Vera Ashford, a child welfare inspector. I'm here to assess the conditions in which the child is being kept, she announced, not bothering with pleasantries. Caleb's voice was dangerously calm. You have no authority to inspect anything without a court order. I have this. She produced a paper signed by a Cheyenne magistrate. Full authorization to evaluate the child's living situation and report my findings to the court. Hartwell smiled, cold and satisfied. Surely you have nothing to hide, Mr. Dawson. Unless the conditions are unfit? Eliza stepped forward before Caleb could do something he'd regret. Come in, Mrs. Ashford. You're welcome to look at whatever you need to see. The inspection was humiliating. Mrs. Ashford examined every room with critical eyes, running her fingers along surfaces to check for dust, inspecting the kitchen for cleanliness, examining Matthew with clinical detachment. She asked invasive questions about Eliza's background, about their marriage, about how they'd come to have Matthew. Through it all, Hartwell stood in the parlor,
his presence a constant reminder that this was his doing, his power. When Mrs. Ashford finally finished, she made notes in a leather journal, without revealing her conclusions. "You'll receive my report through the court," she said curtly, then swept out with Hartwell following. At the door, Hartwell paused. "You could still avoid all this unpleasantness, you know. My offer stands. Hand over the boy, take the money, and walk away. No lawyers, no court battle, no public humiliation when you inevitably lose." Caleb's hand went to the doorframe, gripping it so hard his knuckles went white. "Get off my property." "I'm trying to be reasonable. The only thing you're trying to do is steal our son, and it's not going to work." Hartwell's expression hardened. "We'll see about that, Mr. Dawson. We'll see what Judge Bennett has to say about a barren woman and a broken widower playing house with a child that isn't theirs. We'll see how much your love matters when measured against what I can provide." "He knows about me," Eliza said quietly after Hartwell left. "About my past. About the barren part. Doesn't matter. He's trying to rattle us, make us doubt ourselves. What if Mrs. Ashford's report is bad? What if she says we're unfit?" Caleb pulled her close. "Then we deal with it, together, just like we deal with everything else." They left for Cheyenne the next morning. The journey was hard. 2 days of rough travel with an infant, camping cold at night, pushing through rain and mud. But they made it to the city with a day to spare before the hearing. Morrison met them at a modest boarding house he'd arranged, his face grave. "I got Mrs. Ashford's report. It's not good." Eliza's heart sank. "What does it say?" "That while the home is clean and the child appears healthy, there are concerns about the circumstances. The marriage of convenience, the remote location, the lack of proper medical care, the financial instability." Morrison set the report down. "She stops short of calling you unfit, but she raises enough questions to make the judge think twice." "What about Hartwell?" Caleb demanded. "Did they inspect his home?" "They did, and according to the report, he has a mansion in town, full-time staff, every modern convenience, a nursery prepared with toys and a nanny already hired. He's made it look like a palace waiting for a prince." Eliza felt sick. "How do we compete with that?" "We don't," Morrison said simply. "We can't outspend him, can't match his resources. So instead we make the argument that none of that matters. That what Matthew needs isn't wealth, it's love. Parents who'll put him first. A home, not a showcase." "Will Judge Bennett listen to that?" "I don't know, but it's the only card we have to play." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in the unfamiliar bed with Matthew between her and Caleb, listening to the city sounds outside, so different from the quiet of the ranch. Tomorrow, their entire future would be decided by a stranger in a courtroom. Tomorrow, they might lose everything that mattered. Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "we don't give up. We fight to the last breath. And if we lose? We run. Like you said, we take him and we disappear." "You'd really do that? Give up the ranch, everything you've built?" His answer was immediate and fierce. "In a heartbeat. The ranch is just land and wood. Matthew is our son. You're my wife. That's what matters. That's all that matters." Eliza squeezed his hand, drew strength from his certainty. Tomorrow they would walk into that courtroom and face Marcus Hartwell's money, his lawyers, his power. Tomorrow they would fight for their family with nothing but truth and love as their weapons. And somehow, impossibly, they had to find a way to win. Morning came too quickly. Eliza woke to gray light filtering through thin curtains and the sound of wagon wheels on cobblestone streets. Cheyenne was already awake, indifferent to the small drama about to unfold in its courthouse. She looked down at Matthew sleeping peacefully between her and Caleb, his tiny fist curled against his mouth, and felt her throat tighten with fear. Caleb was already awake, staring at the ceiling. When he felt her move, he turned his head. "Ready?" "No, but it doesn't matter, does it?" "No, it doesn't." They dressed in their best clothes, Eliza in the dark blue dress she'd worn to her first wedding, altered now to fit better, and Caleb in the only suit he owned, brushed clean and smelling faintly of mothballs. They fed Matthew, changed him, wrapped him in the softest blanket they had. Morrison had said to bring him to court, that the judge should see the child at the center of this dispute. The courthouse was an imposing brick building in the center of town, its columns designed to inspire respect or intimidation depending on which side of the law you stood. They climbed the steps together, Eliza carrying Matthew, Caleb's hand firm at the small of her back. Morrison met them in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but his voice was steady. "They're already here. Hartwell brought 3 lawyers and a crowd of character witnesses. He's making a show of this." "What do we do?" Eliza asked. "We tell the truth. We show the judge who you are and what you've given this child. And we pray it's enough." Morrison glanced at Matthew. "How is he this morning?" "Perfect," Caleb said flatly. "Like always." "Good. Keep him visible. Let the court see him healthy and content. It matters." Morrison checked his pocket watch. 5 minutes. Stay calm, answer questions directly, and for God's sake, don't let Hartwell's lawyers provoke you into anger. That's what they'll try to do. The courtroom was smaller than Eliza had imagined, wood-paneled and austere, with rows of benches for spectators and a raised platform where Judge Samuel Bennett would preside. Hartwell was already seated at the plaintiff's table with his legal team, 3 men in expensive suits who radiated confidence. Behind them sat at least a dozen well-dressed people Eliza didn't recognize, presumably the character witnesses Morrison had mentioned. On their side of the room, the benches were nearly empty. Just Samuel Pritchard, who'd ridden 2 days to be there, and a few other ranchers Eliza vaguely recognized. The contrast was stark and deliberate. Wealth and influence on one side, humble working people on the other. Hartwell turned as they entered, his eyes going immediately to Matthew. Something flickered across his face. Grief, perhaps, or genuine longing. For just a moment, Eliza almost felt sympathy for him. Then he looked at her with such cold calculation that the sympathy evaporated. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Samuel Bennett." Everyone stood as the judge entered. He was older than Eliza expected, maybe 60, with iron-gray hair and a face lined by years of difficult decisions. He settled into his chair, surveyed the courtroom with sharp eyes, and gestured for everyone to sit. "This is a custody hearing in the matter of Hartwell versus Dawson, regarding the minor child known as Matthew Winters. Mr. Morrison, as counsel for the defendants, you may present your opening statement." Morrison stood, buttoned his jacket, and addressed the court with quiet dignity. "Your Honor, this case is about what's best for a child. Not what's most convenient, not what looks best on paper, but what will truly serve the interests of a 7-month-old boy who has known only one home and one set of parents since the moment he was born. My clients, Caleb and Eliza Dawson, did not seek to become parents. They became parents because a dying woman placed her infant son in their arms and begged them to keep him safe. They have honored that promise every day since. They have fed him, sheltered him, loved him. They have given him a home. The plaintiff, Mr. Hartwell, is a stranger to this child. Whatever his legal rights may be on paper, he has no relationship with Matthew. No bond, no history of care. What he has is money and influence, which he is using to try to take a child from the only family that child has ever known. We will show this court that Matthew belongs with the Dawsons, and that removing him would cause irreparable harm to a child who has already lost his biological mother. We will show that love and commitment matter more than wealth and social standing. Thank you, Your Honor." He sat down, and Eliza felt a small flicker of hope. Morrison had said it well, made it sound so reasonable. Then Hartwell's lead attorney stood, and the hope guttered. His name was Richard Thornton, and everything about him screamed expensive expertise. "Your Honor, this case is actually quite simple. The law is clear regarding custody rights. Blood relatives, particularly grandparents, have priority over non-relatives, especially when those non-relatives have no legal adoption and took the child under questionable circumstances. My client, Marcus Hartwell, is the biological grandfather of the minor child. His son Richard was married to Anna Winters, the child's mother. When Anna fled in a state of mental distress during her pregnancy, Mr. Hartwell searched desperately for her, hiring investigators and spending considerable resources trying to locate his daughter-in-law and ensure her safety. Tragically, she died before he could find her. The defendants took custody of the child without attempting to locate next of kin, without reporting the death to proper authorities, without following any legal protocol. They simply kept the child as if he were theirs. Now, when the rightful grandfather has found his grandson and seeks to provide for him, they refuse to do what's right. We will show that Mr. Hartwell can offer this child opportunities, education, and security that the defendant simply cannot match. We will show that the defendant's attachment, while perhaps genuine, does not override the legal rights of blood family. And we will show that the best interests of the child lie with his grandfather, who can provide him with every advantage in life. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Bennett made a note, then looked at both attorneys. Call your first witness. Thornton smiled. The plaintiff calls Marcus Hartwell. Hartwell took the stand with practiced ease, swore his oath, and settled into the witness chair like a man completely comfortable with public attention. Thornton led him through his testimony with surgical precision. Mr. Hartwell, please tell the court about your son, Richard. Hartwell's expression arranged itself into paternal grief. Richard was my only child, a good man, kind and generous. He married Anna Winters 3 years ago. They were happy together, or so I believed. When Richard died last summer, a riding accident, I thought Anna and I could console each other in our grief. Instead, she withdrew, became increasingly erratic. How so? She stopped eating properly, stopped attending social functions. She would have conversations with Richard as if he were still alive. I became concerned for her mental state, particularly when I learned she was pregnant. I wanted to help her, to support her, but she wouldn't accept it. What happened next? In November, she disappeared, simply vanished in the night, taking a small amount of money and some clothing. I immediately hired investigators to find her. I was frantic with worry, a pregnant woman in an unstable mental condition, alone in winter. I feared the worst. And when did you learn what had happened to her? 2 weeks ago. One of my investigators traced her movements west and eventually found witnesses who'd seen a pregnant woman matching her description near Devil's Creek in January. Further investigation led me to the Dawson Ranch, where I learned that Anna had died in childbirth, and these people had taken my grandson. How did you feel when you learned this? Hartwell's voice trembled convincingly. Devastated that Anna was gone, furious that no one had contacted me, and desperate to ensure my grandson, the last connection I have to my son, was being properly cared for. When you visited the Dawson Ranch, what did you observe? A remote, isolated property, harsh conditions, a house that, while clean enough, is hardly suitable for raising a child who deserves better, and 2 people who admitted they'd made no effort to find Anna's family, despite keeping her child for months. Thornton let that sink in, then continued. Mr. Hartwell, can you describe what you can offer your grandson? Everything, Hartwell said simply. A beautiful home in Cheyenne, the finest education, travel, culture, opportunities, financial security for his entire life. Most importantly, his family history, the chance to know where he came from, who his father was. These are things the Dawsons cannot provide. Thank you, Mr. Hartwell. No further questions. Morrison stood for cross-examination, and Eliza held her breath. Mr. Hartwell, you testified that Anna was mentally unstable. Did you ever have her examined by a doctor? Hartwell hesitated. No, but her behavior… Yes or no, please. Did a medical professional ever diagnose her with any mental condition? Not formally, but anyone could see. So the answer is no. You simply decided she was unstable based on your own observation. Is that correct? She was clearly grieving in an unhealthy way. Grieving the loss of her husband, your son. Isn't it normal to grieve, Mr. Hartwell? Of course, but there are limits. Who decides those limits? You? Morrison's voice sharpened. You testified that Anna fled in November. Did you report her missing to the authorities? Another hesitation. I hired private investigators. I felt that was more discreet. That's not what I asked. Did you file a missing person report with the police? No. Why not? I didn't want to embarrass the family or make Anna's condition public knowledge. Or perhaps you didn't report her missing because you knew she hadn't simply wandered away in confusion. Perhaps she left deliberately. Thornton objected. Speculation, Your Honor. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Morrison. Morrison changed tactics. Mr. Hartwell, how many times have you seen your grandson? Twice when I went to the Dawson Ranch. So you've spent, what, perhaps an hour total with this child? The Dawsons wouldn't let me see him properly. But you're asking this court to remove him from the only parents he's known and place him with you, a complete stranger. Is that correct? I'm his grandfather, not a stranger. To you, perhaps. But to Matthew, you're a stranger. He doesn't know you. He's never been held by you, fed by you, comforted by you in the middle of the night. Yet you believe you can provide what's best for him? I can provide what they cannot. Security, opportunity, money, you mean. You can provide money. Among other things, yes. And you believe that's more important than love? Hartwell's mask slipped slightly. I didn't say that. But you're arguing it. You're arguing that your wealth and social position should override the bond Matthew has with the people who've cared for him every day of his life. Morrison leaned forward. Tell me, Mr. Hartwell, if Anna ran away in November and she was pregnant, when do you think the baby was due? Late January, early February, perhaps? And yet you testified you only learned of her death 2 weeks ago. You've known your grandson existed for less than a month, yet you claim a superior right to raise him over people who've been his parents since birth. Does that seem just to you? I have a legal right. I'm not asking about legal rights. I'm asking about what's just, what's best for the child. Thornton objected again, and the judge sustained it, but Morrison had made his point. He returned to his seat, and Eliza felt a surge of gratitude for this man fighting so hard for them. The morning continued with character witnesses for Hartwell, business associates, church members, social acquaintances, all testifying to his upstanding nature, his generosity, his fitness to raise a child. It was impressive and depressing in equal measure. Each witness was well-dressed, articulate, respectable. Each painted a picture of Hartwell as a pillar of the community. During a recess, Morrison pulled Caleb and Eliza aside. It's going as expected. Hartwell's making himself look like a saint, but this afternoon we present our case. We show them who you are and what you've done for Matthew. Are you ready? Caleb nodded grimly. Eliza held Matthew closer and said, We're ready. When court resumed, Morrison called Eliza as his first witness. She handed Matthew to Caleb, took the stand with shaking hands, and swore to tell the truth. Morrison's questions were gentle, designed to let her tell their story in her own words. She described the night Anna arrived, the desperate birth, the mother's dying wish. She talked about learning to care for Matthew, the sleepless nights, the fear and the joy mixed together. She explained their decision to keep him, to honor Anna's request. Mrs. Dawson, Morrison said, can you tell the court about your previous marriage? Eliza's throat tightened, but she answered clearly. I was married to Thomas Moore for 4 years. He died of pneumonia. We had no children. Was that by choice? No, I couldn't conceive. In my town, that made me less valuable. When Thomas died, I became a burden. That's why I was sent to Caleb. How did that make you feel? Worthless, like I'd failed at the one thing a woman was supposed to do. And when Anna placed Matthew in your arms, Eliza's voice broke. Like I'd been given a second chance. Like maybe I wasn't worthless after all. Like I could be the mother I'd always wanted to be, just not in the way I'd expected. Do you love Matthew? With everything I am. Would you fight to keep him? I would die for him. Morrison nodded, satisfied. No further questions. Thornton approached for cross-examination with the confidence of a predator who'd spotted weakness. Mrs. Dawson, you testified that you were sent to Mr. Dawson. Sent by whom? The town council, the Reverend. It was arranged. So your marriage was not a love match, it was a transaction. You needed a place to live, Mr. Dawson needed help with his ranch. Is that accurate? At first, yes. And when did it become more than that? Eliza hesitated. Over time, we grew to care for each other. Before or after you decided to keep Anna's baby. The implication was clear and ugly. Eliza felt her face flush. We didn't keep Matthew to save our marriage. We kept him because his mother asked us to, because he needed us. But it's convenient, isn't it? A childless woman desperate to be a mother, suddenly presented with an infant. You saw an opportunity. I saw a dying woman and a helpless baby. I saw people who needed help. And you just happened to benefit. You got the child you always wanted, without the inconvenience of pregnancy or legal adoption. Morrison objected strenuously, and the judge agreed, instructing Thornton to rephrase. But the damage was done, the implication hanging in the air that Eliza's motives were selfish. Thornton shifted approaches. Mrs. Dawson, what medical care has Matthew received? We keep him clean, fed, warm, he's healthy and growing well. But has he seen a doctor? There's no doctor near the ranch. The closest is in Cheyenne, 2 days' journey. So if Matthew became seriously ill, what would you do? We'd do everything we could to help him. But you have no medical training. You live in an isolated area with no professional help available.
Isn't that dangerous for an infant? People raise children on ranches all the time. It's not ideal, but it's not neglect. Mr. Hartwell has a doctor on call in Cheyenne, ready to attend to Matthew at a moment's notice. Can you compete with that? Eliza lifted her chin. I can love him. I can be there when he cries in the night. I can teach him to be kind and strong. Can Mr. Hartwell compete with that? Thornton smiled coldly. We'll let the judge decide. No further questions. Caleb took the stand next, and Thornton went after him with the same ruthless efficiency. He hammered on the arranged marriage, the remote location, the financial instability of ranch life. He brought up Sarah and Daniel's deaths, implying that Caleb's judgment in medical emergencies was questionable. Mr. Dawson, your first wife died in childbirth, and your infant son died shortly after. Yet you chose to keep a newborn baby in the same house where those tragedies occurred.
Didn't you worry history might repeat itself? Caleb's hands gripped the witness chair arms. Every day, but we did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. The right thing? Or the convenient thing? You were lonely. Your wife was desperate for a child. A baby appeared. It solved problems for both of you, didn't it? Matthew wasn't a solution to our problems. He became our family. A family built on convenience and circumstance, not blood and legal right. A family built on choice, on love, on showing up every single day and doing the hard work of being parents. That's what family is. Thornton shook his head as if disappointed. That's a lovely sentiment, Mr. Dawson, but the law recognizes blood, and blood says that child belongs to Mr. Hartwell. Morrison called Samuel Pritchard next, who testified to Caleb's character and Eliza's dedication. He described seeing them with Matthew, how natural and loving they were. Other ranchers followed, each adding their voices to the chorus of support. But against Hartwell's parade of wealthy, influential witnesses, these honest working people seemed small and inconsequential. The afternoon wore on. Judge Bennett listened to everything with an inscrutable expression, asking occasional questions but revealing nothing of his thoughts. When Morrison finally rested his case, it was nearly evening. Closing arguments tomorrow morning, the judge announced. 9 o'clock. Court is adjourned. They filed out into the fading daylight. Eliza felt hollowed out, exhausted by the emotional ordeal of testifying. Caleb was silent, his face like stone. Matthew, oblivious to the battle being fought over him, had slept through most of the proceedings and was now awake and hungry. You did well, Morrison said. Both of you. You came across as genuine, loving parents. But was it enough? Eliza asked. Morrison didn't answer immediately. Finally, I don't know. Bennett's hard to read. He could go either way. That night, they returned to the boarding house and went through the motions of caring for Matthew, feeding him, changing him, getting him ready for sleep. Normal domestic tasks that felt surreal given that tomorrow might be their last day as his parents. After Matthew was asleep, Eliza and Caleb sat together in the small room's only chair, her on his lap, his arms around her waist. Neither spoke for a long time. If we lose, Caleb finally said, if Bennett rules for Hartwell, we won't have much time. They'll want to take Matthew immediately. Then we're ready to run? I've been thinking about it. Canada's closest. We could make it across the border in a week if we pushed hard. Start over somewhere they can't find us. Give up everything. Keep everything that matters. He tightened his arms. I'm not letting them take him, Eliza. I don't care what the law says. He's ours. She turned to look at him, saw the fierce determination in his eyes. You've changed. When I first came to the ranch, you were so shut down, so determined not to feel anything. You changed me, both of you.
You reminded me what it felt like to be alive. He touched her face gently. I'm not going back to being that man. I won't bury my heart again. They made love that night with desperate intensity, clinging to each other as if they could hold back the future through sheer force of will. Afterward, they lay tangled together, and Eliza tried to memorize this moment, the weight of Caleb's arm across her waist, the sound of Matthew's breathing from the cradle beside them, the feeling of being a family. Morning came with rain, gray and cold. They dressed in silence, fed Matthew, and walked to the courthouse through mud and drizzle. The courtroom was fuller today. Word had spread about the custody battle, and spectators filled the benches, drawn by the drama of wealth versus poverty, blood versus choice. Thornton delivered his closing argument first, and it was masterful. He painted Hartwell as a grieving grandfather who'd lost his son and daughter-in-law, who wanted only to ensure his grandson had every advantage. He painted the Dawsons as well-meaning, but ultimately unsuitable, too poor, too isolated, too invested in their own needs to see what was best for the child. Your Honor, the law is clear. Mr. Hartwell is the child's grandfather. He has both the legal right and the means to provide superior care. The defendants have neither. They took this child without authorization, kept him without attempting to find his family, and now refuse to do what's right because they've grown attached. But attachment doesn't create legal rights. Blood does. Money does. And the law does. We ask that you return Matthew to his rightful family where he belongs. Morrison's closing was quieter, but no less powerful. Your Honor, Mr. Thornton keeps talking about rights, legal rights, blood rights, but there's another kind of right that matters more. The right of a child to be with the people who love him. Matthew Dawson was born in a blizzard to a terrified young woman who was running from something. With her dying breath, she asked Caleb and Eliza to keep her son safe. They've honored that promise for 7 months. They've fed him, sheltered him, loved him. They've become his parents in every way that matters. Yes, Mr. Hartwell has money. Yes, he has social position. But he doesn't have a relationship with this child. He's a stranger. And you don't take a baby from his parents and give him to a stranger just because that stranger is wealthy. You consider what's best for the child. And what's best for Matthew is to stay with the only family he's ever known. The Dawsons may not be perfect. They may not be rich. But they're his mother and father. That's what matters. That's what should matter to this court. Please, Your Honor, don't let money win over love. Don't let legal technicalities override what's right for a 7-month-old boy who deserves to stay with his family. When Morrison sat down, the courtroom was silent. Judge Bennett sat motionless for a long moment, then spoke. I've heard extensive testimony from both sides. This is a difficult case, made more difficult by the fact that there are no clear villains here. Mr. Hartwell genuinely wants to raise his grandson. The Dawsons genuinely believe they're Matthew's parents. Both sides have compelling arguments. Both sides clearly care about the child's welfare. Eliza's heart was hammering so hard she thought she might be sick. However, the judge continued, the law exists for a reason. Blood relationships are recognized because they provide continuity, identity, family history. Mr. Hartwell is Matthew's grandfather. That is a legal fact that cannot be dismissed. No, 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 no. At the same time, I cannot ignore the testimony about Anna Winter's state of mind when she arrived at the Dawson Ranch. Whatever Mr. Hartwell believes about her mental condition, the fact remains that she was running from something. She specifically asked the Dawsons to keep her son safe, from whom we may never know, but her fear was real. Judge Bennett leaned forward. I've also considered the bond that Matthew has formed with the Dawsons. At 7 months, an infant recognizes his primary caregivers. Removing him would be traumatic. That matters. Hope flickered, dangerous and painful. Mr. Thornton argues that Mr. Hartwell can provide superior material advantages. That's probably true. But I've presided over enough custody cases to know that money doesn't guarantee happiness or good parenting. I've seen wealthy homes that were cold and empty, and modest homes filled with love. Judge Bennett paused, his eyes moving from Hartwell to the Dawsons and back. After careful consideration, I'm making the following ruling. Primary custody of Matthew Winters will remain with Caleb and Eliza Dawson.
Eliza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Caleb's arm was suddenly around her, holding her upright. However, the judge continued, and Eliza's relief froze. Mr. Hartwell, as the child's grandfather, will be granted visitation rights. Once per month, the Dawsons will bring Matthew to Cheyenne for a day visit. This will allow the child to know his grandfather while remaining with his primary family. Additionally, I'm ordering the Dawsons to file for formal adoption within 6 months, making their custody legally binding. Hartwell stood, his face purple with rage.
Your Honor, this is unacceptable. Mr. Hartwell, you will sit down. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. I've made my ruling. You can appeal if you wish, but I doubt you'll find a sympathetic ear. The child stays with the Dawsons. You get monthly visits. That's my final word. He brought down his gavel, and the sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. For a moment, no one moved. Then Morrison was there, gripping Caleb's shoulder. You won. My God, you actually won. Eliza couldn't speak. She could only hold Matthew and cry, great shaking sobs of relief and joy and disbelief. Caleb's arms came around both of them, and she felt his body trembling too. Across the courtroom, Hartwell gathered his lawyers and stormed out without a word. But just before he left, he turned back and looked at Matthew with such naked longing that Eliza almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then he was gone, and they were surrounded by well-wishers, Samuel Pritchard, the other ranchers, even a few strangers who'd been moved by their story. Everyone talking, congratulating, celebrating. But Eliza only had eyes for Caleb and Matthew, her husband, her son, her family. We won, she whispered. We actually won. No, Caleb said, pressing his forehead to hers. We didn't win anything. We just got to keep what was already ours. They left Cheyenne the next morning, eager to put distance between themselves and the courthouse, between themselves and Marcus Hartwell's fury. The journey home felt different than the journey there, lighter somehow, despite the same rough roads and cold spring rain. Matthew slept peacefully in Eliza's arms, wrapped in blankets, oblivious to the battle that had been fought over him. Caleb drove the wagon with one hand, the other resting on Eliza's knee. They didn't talk much, both too exhausted and overwhelmed to find adequate words. But the silence was comfortable, the silence of two people who'd faced the worst together and survived. When the ranch finally came into view on the second day, nestled in its valley with smoke rising from Samuel Pritchard's temporary care, Eliza felt something in her chest unlock. Home. This place that had once been her exile was now the safest place in the world. Pritchard met them in the yard, grinning wide. Heard the news from a rider came through yesterday. Congratulations, you two. You did it. We had help, Caleb said, shaking his hand. Couldn't have done it without people like you standing with us. Well, the livestock are fed, house is warm, and I left a pot of stew on the stove. Figure you'd be tired from traveling. Pritchard tipped his hat to Eliza. Good to see you home safe, Mrs. Dawson, and the little one too. After he left, they stood together in the doorway of their house, looking around at the simple rooms that held everything they'd built. Caleb set down their bags, then turned to Eliza and took Matthew from her arms, cradling him with the easy competence of a father who'd done this hundreds of times. We're home, he said softly to the baby. This is where you belong, where we all belong. Matthew yawned, completely unimpressed, and Caleb laughed, a sound that still surprised Eliza with its warmth, this man who'd been so closed off just months ago. That night, after Matthew was fed and sleeping in his cradle, they sat together by the fire. Eliza had her head on Caleb's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and for the first time in weeks, she felt truly at peace. The judge ordered us to file for adoption, she said quietly. Within 6 months. I know. We'll do it. Make everything legal and binding so Hartwell can never challenge us again. And the monthly visits? Caleb's jaw tightened. We'll honor the agreement. I don't like it, but Bennett was fair. More than fair. He could have ruled the other way. So once a month, we'll take Matthew to Cheyenne. Let Hartwell spend a day with him, and then bring our son home where he belongs. Do you think Hartwell will try something? Try to take him during one of those visits? He might. But he'd be breaking a court order, and even his money can't protect him from that. Besides, we'll never leave Matthew alone with him. One of us will always be there.
Eliza nodded, reassured by Caleb's certainty. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn low, before Caleb spoke again. "There's something I need to do. Something I should have done a long time ago." "What's that?" "The middle bedroom, Sarah and Daniel's room. We can't keep it as a shrine forever. It's not healthy, and with Matthew growing, we'll need the space." Eliza sat up to look at him. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to lock away a room in grief. She'd want it to be used, to be part of our home." He met Eliza's eyes. "Will you help me? I don't think I can do it alone." "Of course." They started the next morning. Together they went through Sarah's clothes, folding each item carefully. Some they set aside for Eliza to alter and wear, practical garments for ranch work. Others they packed away in a trunk, preserved for Matthew when he was older, so he could know something of the grandmother he'd never meet. Daniel's toys they handled with special care. The rocking horse, the wooden blocks, the small carved animals. Caleb's hands shook as he touched each one, his face working with emotion. "He would have been 8 now," he said quietly. "Old enough to help with the horses. Old enough to be a big brother to Matthew." Eliza put her hand over his. "I wish I could have known him, known them both. Sarah would have liked you. She had strength like you do. She never complained, even when ranch life got hard. And Daniel," Caleb's voice broke. "He had her smile. He had this way of looking at you like you were the most important person in the world." "Matthew has that too," Eliza said gently. "When you hold him, he looks at you the same way." Caleb wiped his eyes roughly. "I know. Sometimes it hurts seeing him, remembering what I lost. But it hurts good, you know? Like the ache of muscles after hard work. It means I'm alive. It means I'm feeling again." They worked through the morning, transforming the room from a tomb into a space for the living. They moved in a small bed for when Matthew grew too big for his cradle, set up the rocking horse in the corner, arranged the toys on shelves where they could be played with instead of gathering dust. The photographs of Sarah and Daniel they kept on the dresser, but no longer as shrines, simply as reminders of people who'd been loved and were still remembered. When they finished, Caleb stood in the doorway, looking around at what they'd created. "It feels right," he said. "Like I'm not forgetting them, just making room for more life. More love." "That's exactly what you're doing." Over the following weeks, they settled back into the rhythm of ranch life with a lightness that hadn't existed before. The weight of the custody battle was gone, replaced by the simple hard work of running a ranch and raising a child. Matthew grew bigger, more aware, beginning to reach for things and babble sounds that might someday be words. He was fascinated by the animals, by the horses especially, and Caleb would carry him to the barn each morning to see them. "That's Thunder," Caleb would say, holding Matthew up to the big stallion who'd tolerate no one but Caleb. "He's stubborn and ornery, but he's loyal once you earn his trust. Like your daddy." Eliza would watch them together and feel her heart swell. This man who'd sworn he wouldn't love this child now narrated their entire life to him, teaching him about the ranch, the animals, the mountains, everything. Matthew absorbed it all with solemn attention, as if he understood every word. The first monthly visit to Cheyenne came in early May. They made the journey with considerable anxiety, neither sure what to expect from Hartwell. Would he be gracious in defeat, or would he make things difficult? They met at Morrison's office, neutral ground. Hartwell arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a woman he introduced as Mrs. Fletcher, the nanny he'd hired. "I thought it best to have her meet the child," Hartwell said stiffly, "so he can become familiar with her presence." Eliza's arms tightened protectively around Matthew. "He doesn't need a nanny, Mr. Hartwell. He has parents." Nevertheless, Hartwell's expression was carefully controlled, but Eliza could see the pain beneath it. May I hold him?" She looked at Caleb, who gave a tiny nod. Reluctantly, she held Matthew out. Hartwell took him with surprising gentleness, and for a moment his mask cracked completely. He looked down at the baby with such raw grief and longing that Eliza had to look away. "He has Richard's eyes," Hartwell said hoarsely. "My son's eyes. I see him in this child." Matthew, for his part, regarded this stranger with suspicion and promptly began to cry. Hartwell tried to soothe him, but Matthew only cried harder,
reaching for Eliza. "He doesn't know you," Eliza said, taking Matthew back. "It'll take time." "Time," Hartwell repeated bitterly. "I've lost so much time already. If Anna hadn't run, if she'd trusted me, I could have been there from the beginning. I could have—" He stopped himself, his jaw working. "Mr. Hartwell," Caleb said carefully, "why did Anna run? What was she so afraid of?" Hartwell's expression shuddered. "She was ill, grieving, not in her right mind." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have to give." Hartwell straightened his shoulders back to the businessman who'd tried to take their son. "The court has granted me this time. I intend to use it to build a relationship with my grandson. I suggest you honor the spirit of the agreement, not just the letter." They spent an uncomfortable day in Cheyenne, with Hartwell attempting to engage with Matthew and Matthew wanting nothing to do with him. Mrs. Fletcher tried as well, offering toys and smiles, but Matthew clung to Eliza and Caleb, making it abundantly clear who his parents were. By the time they left, Hartwell looked exhausted and defeated. "Same time next month," he said curtly, and disappeared into his carriage. "That was harder than I expected," Eliza said as they drove away. "He's grieving," Caleb said. "Lost his son, lost his daughter-in-law, and now he can only see his grandson once a month. I almost feel sorry for him." "Almost?" "Almost. But then I remember how he tried to take Matthew from us, and the sympathy fades." The second visit went slightly better. Hartwell brought a carved wooden horse for Matthew, who was interested in it for approximately 30 seconds before throwing it and demanding to be held by Eliza. The third visit, in July, Matthew actually smiled at Hartwell, probably gas, but Hartwell looked so pathetically grateful that neither Eliza nor Caleb had the heart to say so. Summer came to the valley with an explosion of green. Wildflowers covered the meadows, the creek ran high with snowmelt, and the days stretched long and warm. Matthew learned to sit up on his own, then to pull himself standing by holding on to furniture. He was curious about everything, grabbing at anything within reach, putting everything in his mouth. In August, Morrison came to the ranch to help them file the adoption papers. It was a simple process, made easier by Judge Bennett's order. Within a month, they had official documentation. Matthew Dawson, legal son of Caleb and Eliza Dawson. "It's done," Morrison said, handing them the papers. "He's yours in every way that matters, morally, emotionally, and now legally. Hartwell can never challenge this again." Eliza held the papers with shaking hands, reading the words over and over. Matthew Dawson, their son, official and permanent and real. That night they celebrated quietly, just the two of them and Matthew, sharing a special dinner Eliza had prepared. Afterward, Caleb pulled out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving and poured them each a small glass. "To family," he said, raising his glass. "To second chances. To finding home in unexpected places. To choosing love," Eliza added, "even when we're scared, especially when we're scared." Their glasses clinked together, and they drank, Matthew babbling happily between them, trying to grab the shiny glasses. In September, something unexpected happened. They were preparing for another monthly visit to Cheyenne when a messenger arrived with a letter from Hartwell. Caleb opened it with trepidation, expecting legal maneuvering or new demands. Instead, he found something that made him go very still. "What is it?" Eliza asked. Caleb handed her the letter. She read it once, then again, not quite believing the words. Hartwell was dropping his visitation rights. He wrote that seeing Matthew monthly was too painful, that watching the boy grow attached to other parents while remaining a stranger to him was more than he could bear. He acknowledged that Matthew was happy and healthy with the Dawsons, that perhaps the judge had been right after all. He asked only one thing, that when Matthew was older, they tell him about his biological parents, about Richard and Anna, so he would know where he came from. "He's giving up," Eliza whispered. "He's actually giving up." "Not giving up," Caleb said quietly. "Letting go. There's a difference." They discussed it that night, weighing whether to accept Hartwell's withdrawal or insist he maintain contact. In the end, they decided to write back, offering a compromise. No mandatory monthly visits, but an open invitation. If Hartwell wanted to see Matthew, to be part of his life in whatever way felt manageable, they wouldn't stand in his way.
Hartwell's response came a week later. He thanked them for their generosity and said he would consider it. But as the months passed and no further communication came, they understood. Hartwell had made his choice. He'd recognized that love sometimes meant stepping back, letting go, accepting painful truths. It was, Eliza thought, perhaps the most loving thing he could have done. Autumn turned the valley gold and red. Matthew took his first steps in October, tottering between Eliza and Caleb with a look of fierce concentration that made them both laugh. He was walking confidently by the time the first snow fell in November, 1 year almost to the day since the blizzard that had brought Anna to their door. They went to the hill behind the house where Anna was buried beside Sarah and Daniel. 3 graves, 3 people who'd shaped their family in different ways. Eliza had planted wildflowers there in the spring, and though they were dormant now under the snow, she knew they'd return.
"We should tell him," Caleb said, Matthew bundled in his arms, "when he's old enough. Tell him about Anna, about how brave she was, how she loved him enough to run, to suffer, to die, making sure he'd be safe." "We will," Eliza promised. "We'll tell him everything. About Anna and Richard, about Sarah and Daniel, about how this family was built on grief and hope, and people choosing to love each other even when it was hard." Caleb looked at her, snow catching in his hair, and smiled. "How did I get so lucky? To find you, to find him, to get a second chance at happiness when I thought I'd buried it forever." "The same way I got lucky," Eliza said, standing on her toes to kiss him. "By surviving long enough to find out that being unwanted in one place just meant we were meant for somewhere else. Someone else." Matthew grabbed a handful of snow and tried to eat it, making a disgusted face that sent both his parents into laughter. They walked back to the house together, Caleb carrying Matthew, Eliza's arm around Caleb's waist, all 3 of them leaving footprints in the fresh snow. Inside, the house was warm and bright. The rooms Eliza had cleaned and restored, the furniture Caleb had repaired, the cradle that had moved from the middle bedroom to Matthew's new room upstairs. Evidence everywhere of lives being lived, of a family making a home together. That night, after Matthew was asleep, Eliza and Caleb lay together in their bed, talking quietly about plans for spring planting, about Matthew's development, about the ordinary, precious details of their life. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd said no?" Eliza asked. "That first night, when Anna gave us Matthew, if you'd insisted we take him to an orphanage?" "Every day," Caleb admitted. "And every day I'm grateful I didn't. He saved me, Eliza. Both of you did. I was dying here, just going through motions. You brought me back to life." "We brought each other back," she corrected. "I was dying too, just in a different way, dying from being told I was worthless, from believing it. Matthew gave me purpose. You gave me partnership. Together, you gave me a reason to believe I mattered." "You matter," Caleb said fiercely, pulling her closer. "You matter so damn much. To me, to Matthew, to everyone whose life you've touched." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, and in the morning they woke to Matthew's demanding cries for breakfast and the routine of another day on the ranch. Winter deepened, but it felt different than the previous year. Then, Eliza had been new to this place, uncertain of her role, terrified of the cold and the isolation. Now, she was home. She knew how to manage the livestock and snow, how to keep the house warm through the worst storms, how to find beauty in the stark landscape. And Matthew thrived. He grew sturdy and strong, with Caleb's serious eyes and Anna's delicate features. He was curious about everything, fearless in that way of children who've never known real danger. He'd toddle after Caleb to the barn, demanding to help with chores he was far too small for. He'd sit with Eliza while she cooked, banging pots and making noise and generally being more hindrance than help, but she wouldn't have traded those moments for anything. In January, on the first anniversary of Anna's death, they held a small ceremony on the hill. Just the 3 of them, standing in the snow, remembering the young woman who'd given them this gift. "Thank you," Eliza said softly to the grave, "for trusting us, for giving us your son, for making us a family. I promise you, Anna, we'll raise him right. We'll teach him to be kind and brave and good. We'll make sure he knows he was loved, by you first and by us always." Caleb added his own words, quieter, more private.
Then they headed back down the hill, Matthew riding on Caleb's shoulders, chattering happily about the snow and the horses and a bird he'd seen. Life continued in its patterns. Spring came again, bringing green to the valley and warmth to the air. Matthew's second birthday arrived in the storm season, and they marked it with a simple celebration: cake that Eliza baked, gifts that Caleb had carved, and an afternoon of playing together as a family. As Matthew grew, his personality emerged. He was stubborn like Caleb, compassionate like Eliza, and possessed a fierce independence that probably came from Anna. He loved animals, especially horses, and would spend hours watching them move across the pasture. He loved stories, demanding the same tales over and over until Eliza had them memorized. He loved to help, his small hands trying to participate in every task, no matter how unsuitable for a toddler. And he was loved, so completely, utterly loved that Eliza sometimes felt overwhelmed by it. The sheer force of emotion she felt for this child who'd come to them through tragedy and stayed through choice. One evening in late spring, when Matthew was finally asleep after a particularly energetic day, Eliza and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Caleb had his arm around her, and she leaned into his warmth, content. "Do you ever wonder what the town thinks now?" she asked idly. "The one that sent me away, the people who called me barren and worthless." "Probably don't think about you at all," Caleb said. "People like that, they move on to their next target, their next gossip. You're not worth their time anymore because you're not there to see their judgment." "Good," Eliza said with satisfaction. "I hope they've forgotten me completely, because I've forgotten them. This is my life now, my real life, the one I chose, not the one they tried to force on me." Any regrets?" She pretended to consider. "Well, the winters are brutal. The isolation can be hard, the work never ends. And my husband is impossibly stubborn." "Sounds terrible." "It is," she agreed solemnly. "Absolutely terrible. I wouldn't change a single thing." Caleb laughed and kissed her temple. "Me either. Well, maybe one thing." "What's that?" "I wish I'd been brave enough to really see you sooner, to let myself love you and Matthew without fighting it so hard. I wasted months being stubborn and scared when I could have been happy." "We got here eventually. That's what matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade until Caleb spoke again. "I got a letter today. From Morrison. Hartwell died last month. Heart failure." Eliza sat up straight. "Oh, does that mean nothing changes?" "Matthew's adoption is legal and binding. Hartwell had no other family to contest it, and his will made no mention of Matthew. We're clear. Completely, finally clear." Eliza didn't know what to feel. Relief, certainly, but also a strange sadness for a man who'd lost everything and died alone, having pushed away the one connection he had left to his son. "Should we tell Matthew about him when he's older?" "Yes," Caleb said firmly. "We tell him everything, the good and the bad. Anna's bravery and fear, Hartwell's love and possessiveness, Sarah and Daniel, and how grief shaped us. All of it. He deserves to know his history, even the complicated parts. And if he asks why Anna ran, if we don't have good answers, then we tell him that too, that sometimes people do desperate things for reasons we can only guess at, that his birth mother loved him enough to die protecting him, and that's what matters most." Matthew stirred in his room, made a small sound, then settled back into sleep. Both parents froze, listening, ready to go to him if needed. When he stayed quiet, they relaxed. "He's getting so big," Eliza murmured. "Soon he won't need us as much." "Good," Caleb said. "That's how it should be. We raise him to be independent, capable, strong enough to make his own way in the world. But he'll always have us to come home to. Always have this place, these mountains, this valley, where he's loved." Years passed in the way they do when life is full, quickly, but rich with moments that stretched and mattered. Matthew grew from toddler to boy, learning to ride horses before he could fully read, helping with ranch work as soon as he was able, becoming the kind of child who brought home injured animals and insisted on nursing them back to health. Eliza taught him letters and numbers, reading and writing, using the few books they had and making up stories when they ran out.
Caleb taught him everything about running a ranch, how to gentle a horse, mend a fence, read weather and land and animals. Together, they taught him kindness, resilience, honesty, and love.
When Matthew was 5, he found the photographs in his room, the ones of Sarah and Daniel that Eliza and Caleb had kept for him.
"Who are they?" he asked, bringing them to the kitchen where Eliza was kneading bread. She wiped her hands, sat down, and pulled him into her lap. "That's Sarah. She was your daddy's first wife. And that's Daniel, their son. They died a long time ago, before you were born." Matthew studied the photographs with serious eyes. "So Daddy was sad?" "Very sad. For a long time. But then you came? Then I came. And then you came. And we made Daddy happy again." Matthew thought about this, processing in the way children do. "I'm glad you came, Mama. I'm glad I came too." "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." When Matthew was 7, they finally told him about Anna. They'd planned it carefully, choosing a spring day when they could visit her grave together. They explained in terms a child could understand that a brave young woman had carried him in her body and then given him to Eliza and Caleb because she wanted him to be safe and loved. "So she was my first mama?" Matthew asked, looking at the simple headstone. "She was your birth mother," Eliza said carefully. "She gave you life, and she loved you very much. But I'm your mama now. Is that okay?" Matthew looked between the grave and Eliza, his expression thoughtful. Then he took her hand. "You're both my mama. She gave me life, but you give me everything else. That's what Daddy says. Family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love each other." Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "That's exactly right. You're very wise, Matthew Dawson." "I know," he said with the unconscious confidence of childhood. "Can we bring flowers next time? So she knows we remember her?" "We can do that." They made it a tradition after that, bringing wildflowers to Anna's grave every spring, keeping her memory alive for the son she'd saved. Matthew grew into a good young man, the kind of person Anna would have been proud of. He had Caleb's work ethic and Eliza's compassion, tempered with his own particular brand of stubborn optimism. He was curious about the world beyond the valley, talking about seeing Cheyenne someday, maybe even traveling farther. "When I'm grown," he'd say, "I want to see the ocean, and big cities, and all the places Mama tells me about from her books." "You will," Caleb would promise. "You'll see it all, and then you'll come home and tell us about it." Because that was the thing about Matthew. No matter how far he might roam someday, he would always have this place to return to. This valley, this ranch, this home that had been built on exile and grief and transformed into something beautiful through sheer determined love. On Matthew's 10th birthday, something happened that brought their story full circle. A young woman appeared at their door, heavily pregnant and clearly terrified, asking for help. Eliza and Caleb exchanged glances, remembering another storm, another desperate woman, another choice that had changed everything. "Come in," Eliza said without hesitation. "You're safe here. We'll help you." The woman's name was Clara, and her story was different but equally desperate, fleeing an abusive husband, alone and afraid, with nowhere else to turn. She'd heard somehow that the Dawsons took in strays, that they'd help people who had nowhere else to go. They gave Clara a room, helped her prepare for her baby's arrival, and asked no questions she wasn't ready to answer. Matthew, watching his parents extend compassion to a stranger, learned perhaps the most important lesson they could teach him. That home wasn't just about the family you were born into or adopted into, but about the family you chose to create through acts of love and mercy. When Clara's baby was born, a healthy girl she named Hope, Eliza helped deliver her with hands that remembered another birth, another baby. But this time, the mother survived. This time, there was joy instead of tragedy. Clara stayed with them through the winter, recovering and planning her next steps. In the spring, when she was strong enough, Caleb helped her get to California, where she had distant family willing to take her in. But before she left, she thanked them with tears in her eyes. "You saved us," she said, "both of us. I'll never forget that." "Pay it forward," Eliza said simply. "Someday, when you're able, help someone else who needs it. That's all we ask."
After Clara left, Matthew asked Eliza why they'd helped her, why they'd opened their home to a stranger when they barely had enough for themselves. "Because someone helped us once," Eliza said. "Your grandmother Anna came to our door in a storm, and we took her in. That choice gave us you. So we help others because we know what it's like to need help. We know what it's like to be lost and desperate and hoping someone will show you kindness." "Is that what family means?" Matthew asked. "Helping people even when it's hard?" "That's exactly what it means." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and constants in equal measure. Caleb's hair went gray at the temples. Eliza found lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror. Matthew grew tall and strong, eventually towering over both his parents, with his father's build and his birth mother's delicate features. But the core of who they were remained unchanged. They were a family built on choice, on resilience, on the determination to love each other through whatever came. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, accidents and illnesses, the thousand small crises of ranch life. And through it all, they held together. When Matthew turned 18, he did leave for a while, went to Cheyenne to work and see something of the world beyond the valley. Eliza cried the day he left, even though she'd known it was coming, even though she wanted him to have that freedom. Caleb held her while she wept. "He'll come back. This is his home. He'll see the world, and then he'll come back to us." And Caleb was right. Matthew returned a year later, having seen enough of cities to appreciate the peace of mountains, having met enough people to value the love of family. He came home and took up the work of the ranch alongside his father, preparing to eventually inherit this land and the life his parents had built on it. On a summer evening when Matthew was 20, the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd maintained through all the years. Matthew was telling stories about Cheyenne, making his parents laugh with descriptions of city life and the characters he'd met. Eliza leaned against Caleb, feeling his steady heartbeat under her cheek, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. "I was thinking," Matthew said, turning to look at them both, "I want to build a house. On the East Ridge, where there's that flat meadow. Build my own place, start my own life, but stay close. Stay part of this." "You thinking of getting married?" Caleb asked, one eyebrow raised. Matthew flushed slightly. "Maybe. Eventually. There's a girl in town, Clara's daughter, actually. Hope. We've been writing letters." Eliza sat up straight, delighted. "Clara's Hope? The baby we helped deliver?" "The same. She's all grown up now, smart and kind and, well, I think you'd like her." "We already like her," Caleb said. "And yes, build your house, build your life. We'll help however we can." Matthew grinned, that smile that was all his own, and launched into plans for his future. Eliza listened with half an ear, her mind wandering back through the years. She thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived at this ranch, broken, discarded, certain she had nothing to offer the world. She thought about the man Caleb had been, locked in grief, convinced love was something he'd buried on the hill behind the house. And she thought about Matthew, the baby who'd arrived in a blizzard and brought them both back to life, the child who'd been born from tragedy and raised with love, the son who was now planning his own future, carrying forward the lessons they'd taught him about family and kindness and choosing love even when it was difficult. They'd built something good here, something that would outlast them, carried forward in Matthew and whoever he chose to build a life with. A legacy not of wealth or status, but of love deliberately chosen and fiercely protected. "What are you thinking about, Mama?" Matthew asked, noticing her distant expression. Eliza smiled, reaching out to take his hand and Caleb's, linking the three of them together. "I was thinking about how lucky I am. How a life I thought was over turned out to be just beginning. How exile can become home, and strangers can become family, and love can grow in the most unexpected places. That's because you chose it," Matthew said wisely. "You and Daddy both. You chose to love me when you didn't have to. You chose each other when it would have been easier to stay lonely. That's what makes it real." Caleb's arm tightened around Eliza's shoulders. "When did you get so smart?" "I had good teachers." They sat together as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge. Three people who'd found each other through circumstances that should have destroyed them and instead forged them into something stronger. Three lives that had been broken in different ways and healed together. Three hearts that had learned, against all odds, that family wasn't about blood or law or circumstance. It was about the daily choice to love, to stay, to build something beautiful from the wreckage of what had been lost. In the valley below, lights began to appear in the windows of the house, the home they'd made together. On the hill behind them, three graves rested under wildflowers: Anna, Sarah, and Daniel, all part of this family's story, all remembered and honored. And in the meadow to the east, Matthew's future waited to be built, carrying their legacy forward into whatever came next. The exile that had brought Eliza to this place was long forgotten now, transformed into a journey that had led her exactly where she needed to be. The grief that had nearly destroyed Caleb had been transmuted into wisdom and compassion. And the baby who'd been born into a storm had grown into a man who understood that the greatest strength came from choosing love, even when the world had taught you to expect nothing. They had won no great fortune. They had conquered no enemies. They had simply survived and loved and built a family from the pieces of broken lives. And in doing that, they had won everything that truly mattered. As they rose to go inside for the night, Eliza paused to look back at the valley one more time. This place that had been her punishment had become her salvation. These people who'd been strangers were now her whole world. This life she'd been forced into had become the life she would choose 1,000 times over. "Ready?" Caleb asked, holding out his hand. Eliza took it, laced her fingers through his, and smiled. "Ready." Together, with Matthew beside them, they walked into the warm light of home.